The final days of the Second World War in Europe were defined by one brutal confrontation, the Battle of Berlin. By April 1945, the once mighty Third Reich was collapsing in on itself. Allied forces had already crossed into Germany from the west, while the Soviet Union's Red Army surged forward from the east with overwhelming force. What remained of Adolf Hitler's empire was centered in its capital, Berlin, a city soon to become the stage for one of the most intense urban battles in history. The Soviet advance toward Berlin was led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, one of the most capable and relentless commanders of the war. His forces, numbering over 2 million soldiers, were supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Facing them were the remnants of the German army, exhausted, under-equipped, and increasingly desperate. Many of the defenders were not seasoned soldiers, but teenage boys from the Hitler Youth, elderly men pressed into service, and scattered units trying to hold together what little remained of organized resistance. As Soviet forces closed in, they encountered fierce resistance along the Silo Heights, a critical defensive line east of Berlin. The fighting there was savage, with heavy casualties on both sides. But the sheer weight of Soviet numbers and firepower eventually broke through the German defenses. Once that line collapsed, the road to Berlin lay open. Inside the city, conditions were rapidly deteriorating. Continuous bombing raids had reduced much of Berlin to rubble. Infrastructure had collapsed. Communication lines were failing, and civilians were trapped in a nightmare of destruction. Food and water were scarce, and fear was everywhere. Yet, despite the hopelessness of the situation, orders from the Nazi leadership were clear. Berlin was to be defended at all costs. Adolf Hitler, now increasingly isolated and detached from reality, remained in his Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Surrounded by a shrinking circle of loyal aides, he continued to issue commands to armies that no longer existed or were incapable of carrying out his orders. His refusal to accept defeat only prolonged the suffering within the city. By late April, Soviet troops had entered Berlin itself. The battle transformed into a brutal street-by-street, building-by-building struggle. Tanks rolled through shattered avenues while infantry advanced through basements, stairwells, and ruins. Every block became a battleground. German defenders used the urban environment to their advantage, setting up ambushes and sniping positions, while Soviet forces responded with overwhelming artillery and close-quarters assaults. One of the most symbolic and fiercely contested objectives was the Reichstag building. Though it no longer held significant political power, it remained a powerful symbol of Nazi Germany. Soviet forces were determined to capture it and raise their flag over its ruins as a sign of victory. The fighting around the Reichstag was particularly intense, with German defenders making a final stand amid the shattered structure. Meanwhile, chaos reigned within the German command structure. High-ranking officials attempted to flee the city, while others sought to negotiate surrender. But Hitler refused any talk of capitulation. On April 29th, he married Eva Braun in the bunker, a final personal act as the world above collapsed. The following day, April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. His death marked the beginning of the end for organized resistance in Berlin. Even after Hitler's suicide, fighting continued. Soviet forces pressed deeper into the city, tightening their grip and eliminating pockets of resistance. Fires burned across Berlin, and the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed constantly. Civilians hid in basements, hoping simply to survive another day. On May 2, 1945, Berlin finally fell. General Helmuth Weidling, the city's defense commander, surrendered to Soviet forces. The battle was over. What remained of Berlin was a devastated landscape. Buildings destroyed, streets filled with debris, and countless lives lost. It was a stark and sobering end to years of war in Europe. The Battle of Berlin was not just a military confrontation. It was the collapse of an entire regime. The ideology that had driven Nazi Germany into war had led to unimaginable destruction, and its final chapter played out in the ruins of its own capital. For the Soviet Union, the victory came at a tremendous cost, with hundreds of thousands of casualties. But it marked a decisive moment that would shape the post-war world. In the aftermath, Berlin itself would become a symbol of a new kind of conflict. Divided between East and West, it stood at the front line of the emerging Cold War. The city that had witnessed the fall of Nazi Germany would soon represent the tensions between two global superpowers. The Battle of Berlin remains one of the most studied and remembered battles in history. It serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of war, the dangers of unchecked power, and the consequences of ideological extremism. For those who lived through it, it was a time of unimaginable fear and loss. And for the world, it marked the beginning of the end of the Second World War in Europe. Even today, the echoes of those final days can still be felt. The ruins have been rebuilt, and the city has transformed. But the memory of what happened in Berlin in 1945 remains an enduring part of history.